Well, good afternoon. How you doing? Today we're doing a Mother's Day message. I've called it Mom Story, okay? Lots of mom stories today. And as we talk about mom stories, we talk not just about women who have biological children, but all women of influence here at the Grove, and we're thankful for all of you. I just want to say that over my years, almost, 48 plus years now here at the Grove, I can tell you the health of this church has been built on women of influence so many times, over and over again. And as a pastor who's been here a long time, I'm thankful for every one of you. You've done a great thing. Billy Graham says this: only God himself fully appreciates the influence of a Christian mother in the molding of character in her children. And we should all say to those who have influenced us, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, some of the moms here will know what I'm talking about. There's a 4-year-old son, and he was trying to learn how to count, and his mom would come in every so often, teach him how to count on his fingers. And every birthday, she'd teach him from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and he's almost at his 5th birthday. And she comes in at night, the day before his birthday, and she says, today you are 4, but tomorrow we're going to add the 5th, your thumb, and you'll be another year older. She says, do you know what you'll be tomorrow? And he looks at his mom and he says, I will be a handful. And I hope that all you moms who understand that in the real, true way sense today that you understand. I hope you have a good Mother's Day anyway, all right? Even with that handful of a child you may have. Moms always want to be perfect. They want to have things perfect for their kids. And there was this lady, Linda Hutchins, and she was at her daughter's wedding. She got the beautiful dress, the hairdo, did her fingernails, acrylic fingernails. And her and the other mom were going to light the unity candle. And they walked up the aisle very beautifully. She took the lighter and was going to light the little candle that she had in her hand to light the unity candle. And as the flame got too close to her acrylic nail, it lit the nail on fire. Only wanting it to be perfect, she didn't flinch. She didn't do anything, just raised her finger up, and she lit the candle with her acrylic fingernail, and then blew it out like a gunslinger and holstered her weapon. She was the talk of the town at the reception, her blackened and burnt fingernail. I love the stories of mom. I especially love the story of Ben Carson's mom. I had the privilege of having lunch with Ben Carson not too long ago, and I want to tell you, he is the real deal. And I want to tell you a story. I'm going to read it to you tonight. You'll see it on the screen. The story of Ben Carson's mom, edited from an article that Ben Carson wrote himself. In the story related by Ben Carson in 1996, he wrote that his mother was instrumental for him and his brother to start catching up and making headway in school. Carson often shared that at times his academic performance lagged well behind his peers. Sonia, his mom, however, taught her sons that it was in their power to change their situation in life, both academically and financially. My mother understood how success was achieved in our society, wrote Carson. If anyone had a reason to make excuses, it was her. Let me stop there. If you don't know the story of Ben Carson, Sonia Carson, she was married at 13 years old. She was married at 13, and in her early years, she had 2 sons, which one was Ben. And as she continued on in their life, they realized that her husband, who she was married to, had a whole different family. And so he was married to a different wife, had different kids. Unbeknownst to her, she divorced her husband and raised Ben and his brother on her own. She had every reason to complain. Carson says if anyone had reason to make excuses, it was her. But she refused to be a victim and would not permit us to develop the victim mentality either. According to Carson, his mother devised a plan for her sons to curb TV time and write 2 book reports a week instead. Working as a domestic for successful families, she had noticed they read far more than they watched television. Parents, that's a good idea for all of our kids. The required book reports were turned into Sonia, who would mark them up with check marks and highlights. Years later, we realized her marks were a ruse, wrote Ben Carson in an NPR commentary on parenting. My mother was illiterate. She only had received a 3rd grade education. For Ben, regular reading was the beginning of a fruitful academic career that eventually took him to Yale and to Johns Hopkins University Hospital, where he worked as director of the neuropediatric surgery from 1984 to his retirement in 2013, and then we know he went on to politics as well. I would say this about Sonia: she gave her kids what she had to give. She couldn't teach them how to read, but she gave them accountability. She gave them love. She gave them example, challenge, and a strong, strong faith in God. So why do we refer to Mother's Day at the Grove as Women of Influence, this day that we're going to celebrate all women of influence? We realize everyone doesn't have biological children of their own, every woman, but we realize that women have significant influence even if you don't have biological children. So we want to celebrate everyone. As I share today, you're going to hear me say some things, and you say, well, that applies to men as well, or dads as well. And I agree with that, but this is not Father's Day. This is Mother's Day, okay? So dads, just back off a little bit and relax, all right? We're not going to talk about you today. Well, maybe a little bit. So over the past years, I think I have probably preached in my years here at the Grove probably 35 or more Mother's Day messages. And so what I've done this time is I've gone back and I've looked at some of those women that I have prepared a whole message for, and I've chosen several of them. I'm just going to have a little glimpse of their life and talk about maybe one attribute of their life that I think is significant and is so evident in women of influence here at the Grove. And so I hope you stick with me today. Number one on your notes, we take notes at the Grove. We remember more when we take notes. Number one is Mom Stories. The title is point number one as well. And you may say, this sounds so much like Christmas, because it was the exact text I used for Christmas when I preached on Christmas. I'm talking about Mary to start with, from Luke 1, 34 to 38. She has become pregnant. She heard the news. She's pregnant through the Holy Spirit. And she asked the question to the angel in verse 34, "How will this be," Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she, who was said to be unable to conceive, is in her 6th month, for no word from God will ever fail." Then Mary says this, what I think is so significant, and really it's the first time in preaching about Mary in all these years that I really got the significance in this way as I preached this last year. Mary says, "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May your word to me be fulfilled." Then the angel left her. Mary is a teenager. She's 14, 15 years old. She's a child, and hearing about this, unbelievable. You can't fathom this announcement from the angel that she's going to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit, through God, that she's going to carry God's child with her, and she's going to give birth to Jesus, the Messiah that they're waiting for. And as she begins to process it, she says simply something like this: "If that's from God," and she knew it was, "then I'm going to do what God calls me to do. Yes, if it's from God, then I'm going to do what God calls me to do. I'm going to be faithful to that." She didn't question. She didn't doubt. Even as a young person, as I see her life, as she grows in her life, I see this moment of her life being pivotal for her, where she just understands that God has spoken, and her response to God should be yes. I'm so thankful for people like Mary when she says that she'll just be obedient to what God calls her to be. When I think about Mother's Day, this is one of the great qualities we find in women of influence. When they are sold out to Jesus, when they say yes to Him, when they're all in, they have complete obedience and faith in what God calls them to do. That's why a lot of Proverbs says this about these kind of women. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Why? Because they said yes to Jesus first. Mary said yes to Jesus first in all of her decisions. And like Mary, many of the women at the Grove have done that. And I have been able to observe this firsthand for so many years. I'm thankful I'm able to teach on Mother's Day, to be able to share with so many of the women of influence again how much I appreciate you, deeply appreciate you. There was a time in my young life when I asked my dad, "Where are the guys in the church?" Because in our church back in the day, there were no guys. Not talking about my dad and the few of them that were here, but our church was dominated in a good way by women. The men just didn't come to the church. And over the years, men began to come to the church. But I'm so thankful as I think back on my years of all the women who were so faithful, faithful. Complete obedience is the target for all women of influence, really for all people. God can best use us when we're all in and we trust Him completely. And again, I just want to say thank you. One of my spiritual gifts is faith, and I think my spiritual faith has been built in many, many ways by the women of the Grove who have had great influence on me over the years. I know I'm talking to some that have already dearly departed because I be old today, and I've done a lot of their funerals. These women who have just poured into me over the years since I started attending this church when I was 14 years old. I say thank you to the women of the Grove. Your influence, your obedience, your dedication, I love that. At times, women feel all alone. In John 19, 25 to 27, talking about the cross and Mary at the cross of Jesus, it says, "And standing by the cross of Jesus, his mother and the sister of his mother, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary the Magdalene." Those are the ones who were there, as well as John the Beloved. Mary had to feel all alone. She had gone through a time earlier when she lost her husband, Joseph. Joseph's death was hard on Mary. And now she comes to a time when even though she's surrounded by people that love her, the few women and John, she sees the horrible death of her son on the cross. And I do a lot of funerals, and I've been with people at loss when people in the family have died. And I know how it is when you try to concentrate and you try to think and try to make sense of life. And sometimes they tell me, I just feel so alone. So alone. And she went through that. Many of the disciples had deserted Jesus at that time. She went through that agony of seeing her son go through that. I see that in many women of influence here at the Grove. They just never give up. Thank you for never giving up. You never run away from hard things. That's what I love about women of influence. They're always there for their kids, their families. Even when no one else shows up, they're there. Many times when I go to the hospital to see someone in the hospital that is in a serious situation, it would be a woman, a mom or a woman of influence is there, and many times she's all by herself. And I just want to say thank you that you never give up no matter what. Mary was also a single mom. Is there a harder job in the world than being a single parent? I just don't think I know one. Mary was a single mom. Scholars tell us that probably Joseph died somewhere when Jesus was a teenager. And so Mary took the job now of being a single mom of Jesus and his siblings. And again, I would say if there's a tougher job in the world than being a single mom, I don't know what it would be, or a single dad. And I don't know, but we know this about Mary, that she did what many women of influence do today. She adjusted and did what she had to do. I've seen that in my own family. I've seen that in people in this church, women in this church, that when tragedy happens and you find yourself all alone raising kids, you just figured it out. You became this different type of person that said, if that's my new calling, if that's what I need to do, with God's help, I'm going to do it. And you stepped into a role, the role called mom, and you did it by yourself without a spouse. And I want to tell you, I just appreciate you so much for that. Your kids should call you blessed. It's a beautiful thing that you have done. I want to talk for a moment about Queen Esther. She's a brave woman. Most of us know her from a verse in Esther 4:14 where it says, "For such a time as this, Esther was called on." If you really want to read the story, I read it this morning. It's a beautiful story from Esther chapters 3 through chapters 8. If you don't know the story of Esther, Esther was really a beauty pageant winner. They went out, they said the king wanted a new queen, and from all the surrounding countries, they're going to have this beauty pageant, and Esther won. She won. In this story, Haman is the villain. Boo, Haman, bad guy. He's a guy who wants everyone to bow down and worship him. The king even gave him the permission to have people bow down and worship him. Esther's parents died, and she was raised by a man called, tell me what his name is? Mordecai, what do you want to call him? And so she was raised by her uncle, all right? So we have the sort of setting the ground rules here. As Haman sat in the city square. As people came by, they bowed down and worshiped him as they were supposed to do or commanded to by the king. When Mordecai came by, he wouldn't bow down. It just infuriated Haman. He didn't like this at all. And so he was mad, so much so that he devised this plan because Mordecai was Jewish, so was Esther. And so he went to the king and devised this plan to have all the Jews, including Mordecai and Esther, all killed. The king put his stamp of approval on that. Word got around what was going to happen. And so the uncle goes to Esther and says this to her: Esther, you have to go to the king and talk to him. Now you say, well, she's the queen. Why don't you just go talk to the king? It didn't work that way. In fact, if you read the story in chapters 3 to 8, you realize she hadn't even seen him for a month. That's not unusual because they had lots of queens at that time. He had lots of wives, and so you didn't see him all the time. In fact, you couldn't just walk in and see the king. If he was in a bad mood, if he didn't want you to come, if he didn't like what you said, he would have you killed, and that was a common practice. You don't interrupt the king. And so Mordecai says to Esther, you have to go and talk to him. If you don't talk to him, if you don't change his mind, all the Jews are going to be killed. For such a time as this, you have been born. And so she thinks through this. She understands it's on her shoulders to go do what no one else can do. And so she could have shrunk away and did what was easy, but she goes and she talks to the king. And the king invites her in, and he changes his mind about killing all the Jews. In fact, Haman is killed. He's killed in the gallows that he made for Mordecai. And so the whole story, it's a beautiful story. But here's the story. I think it's a beautiful story. Here's the beautiful story. When she had to stand up and do the hard thing, Esther did it. When she had to call upon her voice, when no one else had a voice to the king, she did. She didn't shrink away. She didn't worry about her own life, but she did what she was supposed to do. And I want to say again, I've watched the women here at the Grove for so long. I've watched you say, use your voice. And I don't mean just screaming and yelling things that are crazy. I mean when you hear God speak to you, when you know God has called you to a certain position or situation where you can change something, when you can use your voice for someone who cannot speak, when you can make a situation better. I love it when women of influence stand up and do what God has called you to do. Thank you for doing that. But you know, moms don't always do the right thing. We have a story in the Bible, Rebecca, who was Isaac's wife, and there's great favoritism in this family. Rebecca had this love towards Jacob. Isaac had the love towards Esau, and they instilled in their two boys competition, strife, resentment. Has led now 3,500 years later, still strife among these two nations. Not all moms do it right. Carol and I were trying to think the other day. I said, how many mistakes do you think we've made in raising our kids? Are we still in the hundreds, or are we gone to the thousands? Is there a parent here that says, you know what, I can't think of a time that I made a mistake. I really can't. If you are going to raise your hand, I'll do counseling with you after the service, because I know you have a problem with lying, all right, and telling the absolute truth. Because at the Grove, we tell all the truth what? All the time. So, sometimes parents do things, and I want to say this, and I want you to hear me clearly. Sometimes parents do terrible things that if they're going to be forgiven and you're going to go on and live your life as God wants you to live it, it's probably going to take some hard conversations and counseling and prayer and just being open to make something like that happen from both parties. But I've been around long enough to know this. Many times as kids, we hold on to things that our parents did to us that aren't really terrible things. They just acted in a certain way, said something that you didn't feel was appropriate, and for some reason that just sort of ticked you off, and you just quit talking to them, or you know the relationship is broken. And I would say that if that's your situation you find yourself in tonight, maybe Mother's Day would be a great weekend to go to your mom, the woman of influence, and say, you know what? I'm sorry for acting the way I did when you said what you did or did what you did. It wasn't that big a deal, but in my mind, I just made it bigger than it was, and I don't want to live like this anymore. I know it's different than some things that really need counseling and a lot of work, and I know there's some of those situations that are out there that will take years and years to fix. But for a lot of people, they're not talking to a parent because of something that's pretty trivial, and they've let it become very, very big, and this may be a great weekend just to take care of that. Timothy was a major player in the Bible. We have two books that are written about him. His grandmother was named Lois. His mother was named Eunice. There wasn't a man in the house. In 2 Timothy 1:3-5, it says, I thank God whom I serve, Paul writing this, the Apostle Paul, as my ancestors did with clear conscience. As night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers, recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives in you also. No man present in the house. Paul becomes Timothy's spiritual leader later on, but just because there wasn't a man in the house, Lois and Eunice didn't say, oh, we can't raise a godly man. They poured into Timothy. They shared faith with Timothy. Timothy was a godly man because of his mom and his grandmother. And again, thank you, women of influence, who have poured into so many of your own kids and kids of the Grove, and you have caused them to really love God and love His Word in a special way. The mother of Moses, Jehoshaphat, found herself in a very difficult situation. In Exodus 1:22, it says, Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Jehoshaphat had Moses, the boy. She raised him, but he was becoming too loud to keep, and she realized that if she didn't do something, they were going to come and kill Moses. And so she made one of the most difficult decisions of her life, giving Moses away. She put him in a little basket and put him in the Nile, and Pharaoh's daughter came. You know the story. But it had to be an incredible, difficult decision for her. And I know some of you in this room have had to say, at this time, I'm not in the right position to raise a child, and you've given your child up for adoption, not because you didn't want the child. You love the child and care for the child. Some of you women of influence have made some of the most difficult decisions I've ever seen in my life because of your love and your incredible devotion to children and to people. And I want to say it hasn't gone unnoticed by our church over the years. You've done the right thing. You haven't backed away when it got hard. And even though it was very, very hard and some people didn't understand why you made the decision you did it because you love so deeply. And I thank you for that. Before I bring Carol on stage, I want to talk about Hannah, who went a large part of her life without having a child. And on Mother's Day, there's all kinds of emotions because some gals who can't have a biological child, Mother's Day just ruins them. It just does. And you have the same kind of prayer that Hannah had when it says in 1 Samuel 1:10, in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly, God, give me a child. I want to say to you again, women of influence, those of you that may not be able to have or haven't yet have been able to have biological children, your faithfulness is amazing. In something that is so difficult, when God has said no or wait or continue your hope, and when you've been in great pain, I've seen you live lives that are amazing. Not giving up, not withdrawing, not turning your back on God. And I just want to say this to all the ladies here. You have created in many of us a faith and an understanding of God that we would have never had without you and your walk and how you've approached situations in your life in such a beautiful way. We've watched you. We've learned from you. We love you, and we thank you for who you are and what you mean to the church. The next point, number 2, is the secrets of motherhood. Well, I'm probably not the right person to do this one, and so I'm inviting Carol to the stage. Carol, come on up. Carol has vertigo, so I'm going to help her up here. She's not feeling so good today. I need to get you to the chair. Even on Mother's Day when she's sick, she's a team player. Get up there, girl. I need you to save my sermon. So Carol has been when we first got married, she worked full time. Then when the kids were young, she stayed at home with them, full-time mom. Then as they got a little bit older, she became a substitute teacher so she could be home when they were. Then she began her career here at the Grove, and that's lasted, again, a long, long time. So I have some questions for Carol. So you can answer them any way you want to. I haven't told you what to answer, have I, Carol? Tell the people. No, this is all you. I think you have a superpower, Carol, as I watch you as a mom. Even though we've made over 1,000 mistakes, some of the things I think we've done okay. And one of them is that you are amazingly consistent as a mom. Our kids didn't get up 5 times to get a drink of water. They didn't, when they went to bed at 7:30, and they went to bed at 7:30 for years and years. I think they were worried in high school they had to still go to bed at 7:30. But when we ate at the table every night, we didn't eat in front of the TV. They had to do their homework. You wouldn't do it for them. I couldn't do it. After 5th grade, they'd never come to me again for any question of school. So how is it that you were so consistent when I would be leaning towards fun dad? I'd rather let him stay up a little bit longer. How do you do that with me in the house, raising 3 boys?
Well, I think God helped me out a little. He made me quite stubborn and, yeah, maybe even bullheadish. But I think it may have been before the boys were born, I had been reading a book from Dr. James Dobson. He was the Christian child psychologist back in our day. And he said something that I think kind of changed the way I would parent from that point on. He said, children are very smart and they can figure out when they have to do something. A mom walks in and sees toys on the floor and says, pick up the toys. And she walks out. 5 minutes later, she comes back in, and her voice is a little bit louder, and she said, I told you to pick up the toys. And she walks out, and she comes back in 3rd time. Now she's yelling. She's threatening to break the toys and put them in the trash. And then the kids figure, okay, now it's time. I have to pick up the toys and put it away. And he said, you can tell your child on the 3rd time when I'm yelling, screaming, and insane, it's time. Or the 1st time, you can say, pick up the toys, stand there until they pick up the toys. Now, it takes more time on your part. You're having to stand there. You're helping them get up, pick up the toy, put it over there. And when they're 1 and 2, it's easy to do. And once they learn you mean what you say, it helps. And that, I think, is really how I learned to be consistent.
I put my toys away, too, in case you want to know. So one thing, you grew up in a family that was all education. And so, but you allowed the boys to be the boys. We would box. We had boxing gloves. And we'd box in the front room, and we'd wrestle. I remember my greatest joy when Danny was probably 3 or 4, and I was teaching him how to hit in the front room, how to swing a baseball bat. We had a wiffle ball bat, and I was tossing him tennis balls. And he just smashed one, and he broke the lamp. And I'm thinking, the best day of my life. I just loved it. I mean, that's how we grew up, and that's how I raised the boys. How did you put up with that anyway? We were so different.
Well, I recognized that my way was not, it was a good way, but it wasn't a complete way. And I saw the value of a well-rounded child more than just an educated child, or forget the education, just an athlete. But to have both would be what would be best. And besides, you were fun, and they were enjoying it, so I didn't want to be the cranky mom. So,
I remember you telling them when they used to go outside and box, and they said, "You can go and do it, but if you get a bloody nose, don't come and cry to me." I thought, wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful mom. The boys never knew we were poor. I mean, we went through 6 or 7 years where I couldn't buy you any clothes. I thought I got a good job one time, and I went out and bought you a watch that watch had been broken for 2 years, and then I didn't get the job. And I had to take your watch back and give it back. The boys had to wear hand-me-down clothes for 6 years. We had one of the boys on welfare. How do you make them know that we weren't poor?
this is something I think God just did. He made me thankful for what he was able to give us. We had friends who had boys that grew faster. They were in the percentile, like the 90th percentile of growth. And they would buy clothes because they could afford them that their boys never wore. And they were just the same as Dan and Mike in age. And so we'd go to dinner over at their house and we'd come home with a wardrobe. And rather than feeling like I can't provide or we don't have enough for them, I just felt thankful that God had provided through these friends that kept our kids dressed until, I don't know when in elementary school we finally could buy our own clothes.
I remember that when we started the whole thing, it was a mini skirt era, and Carol had these mini skirts on, and then everybody started wearing longer skirts, but I couldn't afford to buy them any, except Christmas. Our parents did once in a while. And so I sort of liked the mini skirt thing. It was good, but eventually they went a little longer. So you had tremendous influence over the kids when they were little. But as they started getting older, the boys, two boys, you sort of stepped back from your influence. You always have influence. I mean, always academically. After that, I think they were in 5th grade, they never came to me for another question. History, math, English, anything. Anything. Even my grandkids don't come to me. And they're smart not to. But why would you step back with your influence and push them towards me?
I think that was a God reveal. We were sitting at the table and the kids were arguing or something and I was saying something and then you voiced something and both boys looked at you and they stopped whatever they were doing. And it was, God let me see it was time. I had been the consistent, the mom that got things done, and it was time to let the dad of influence, who was wise, who was smart, who was maybe not book smart, but very smart.
Hey, I married up. How'd you guys do, okay? I didn't have to do any homework. It was all good. So, all right. So you pushed academics. I pushed sports. Did that ever bug you that I would rather keep them outside playing baseball when you wanted them to do their homework?
Well, I made sure they got their homework done.
I know, you ruined a few seasons. Fun and teasing. When I grew up, that's all we did. We teased each other. That's what we did. And your family didn't do that. So when you married me, that became part of our culture of our family. Different, I think, for you, but you adjusted to it. Was it hard to adjust to that?
No. That was one of the things that attracted me to you in the beginning. And so to have that as part of our family, it was, again, I was raised, I think, well. I was raised but it wasn't complete. Having you bring in the fun, the sports, it made the family more well-rounded, I think.
And I've tried to make you an athlete.
He does. I have the most expensive equipment of bowling, golfing, anything we took, he'd make sure I have the right equipment. Still don't know how to use it all right, but I do try.
And you try to make me smart.
And that worked.
Oh, yeah. So tell them one thing you learned. If I could do it over again, I'd do it this way. Or one thing I learned about being a woman of influence, a mom, what you did wrong or right or whatever it might. What one thing you learned?
Well, it's kind of two things. The first thing is the positive. When I spent time with God, God gave me God moments. With the kids, I could see this is the time to say something. With spending time with God was the most important thing. The thing I had to learn to do, because I did it wrong so many times, was I'm a teacher at heart, love to teach. Poor kids got taught. And there were times, especially as they got older and they were struggling with what they wanted to do, and I was struggling with what I wanted them to do, that I overtalked. And I still remember Tom, and again, a God moment, Tom asked me, what did you tell them that they didn't know? And I'm thinking, well, they needed to hear it again. And but that was where I realized that God had, and I had heard, I didn't hear a voice, but when I was in the middle of a tirade telling them what they were supposed to do, I felt God's presence saying, be quiet. And it was almost as if I put my hand up and said, God, wait a minute, I'm not done. And that, I realized when I finally shut up, God worked things out a whole lot better than I was working them out.
So what's more fun, being a mom or being a grandma?
Oh, a grandma.
Grandma.
No question. The responsibility, especially if you have good Christian kids raising those kids, you just get to love them and spoil them. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay. Number 3 on your notes, I know you're still taking notes. Celebrate and be the woman God created you to be. At the Grove, we have all kinds of different ladies, different personalities, everything, lots of things different. If you give one word of advice to the women of the Grove, what would you tell them?
I would say learn to love God well. Because when you love God well, you'll love your kids well. And that doesn't mean loving them like grandma's, spoiling them rotten. It means loving them and telling them where the boundaries are. It means loving them and telling them who God is. It means loving them and pointing them in directions that God has created them to go. And you can't do that on your own. But with God's help, He gives you those God's visions at times that just say, stop talking, encourage here. You know, by spending time with God is, I think, your best way to influence your kids for Him. Because if they don't love God, and I'll say one more thing, praying for the kids' hearts more than their actions. Because if their hearts love God, their actions will be good. If you pray specifically for an action here or an action here, they may start doing the right things, but until their heart is changed, it doesn't matter.
I'm just doing this for the ladies of the Grove. Many of them asked me to ask you to tell their husband or tell them. No, this is off the cuff. You'll do it. How did you train me to make our bed every morning? I mean, seriously, maybe 5 times in 49 years we haven't made the bed. How'd that happen anyway? I never made my bed as a kid.
I know that. I think you love me, and because I'm consistent and a little bit stubborn, I continued to make it, and you felt bad me making it and you standing there watching me. So.
And 47 pillows on the bed at all times. It's the dumbest thing ever, but we're going to do it till we die. Okay, we'll do it. So when you come to visit, because our bed's always made, would you just say, hey, can I see your bed? I want to show somebody. Carol, he said, someone may come by. No one's ever come by and say, can I see your bed made? When you come by and ask me, I want to show you our bed, okay? Anytime, it's going to be made, I guarantee, all right? Thank you for saving my sermon, all right? God bless you. You okay? Worship team's going to come back out. We're going to conclude. I want to say again, thank you. We have candy bars out there for the women of influence. Listen, do not go out there and say, what would my child like? I don't care about your child tonight, okay? Get something that you like, and when your child asks for it, say, no, go get me some iced tea. Do not get a candy bar for your child. This is for you. We love you. We thank you for all you've done. And let me pray, and the worship team's going to come back as we close. Father, again, I just thank you. I'm thankful personally, God, for the women of influence here at the Grove, for what they've meant to me and what they've meant to this church and the leaders of the church and the pastors of this church. They have absolutely kept this church going when there were times when the church almost closed down. God, I'm so thankful for them in the past, present, and what's going to happen in the future. I pray you bless them and encourage them. I pray, God, that you pour into them all that they need, God, that they'll receive from you, they'll hear from you. God, I just pray you love on them. For all the difficult situations many are going through right now, God, I pray you give them peace. I pray you give them strength. I pray you give them encouragement and hope. And God, may they know more than anything else today that they are deeply loved. And we thank you for that in the powerful, wonderful, mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Church, if you're willing and able, will you stand and sing this last song with us?
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring.
so thankful for a firm foundation to build our lives on. Church, we love worshiping with you. Just a few reminders as we close. If you're a guest with us, we want to meet you and shake your hand over here at Guest Central. Just tell you more about the Grove or answer any questions you might have. And there'll be prayer partners in the front who would love to pray with you about anything that you're walking through. And just remember, women of influence, there's a gift, there's some candy for you in the lobby, so please go grab your gifts. We love you, church. Happy Mother's Day weekend.